Hello and welcome to today's edition of Daf Yomi. Today's Daf is Menachot 17 Amud A, and we'll start with just Amud A. So let's dive straight in. So just to finish the line from the last Amud, so say Amri, short people of Pumbedita. So it gives a description here of Pumbedita. There's a little map here. If you've got the Steinsaltz, which I'm using, page 106. Khalife de Pumbedita, the sharp people of the city of Pumbedita. According to the Gemara in Sanhedrin 17b, this refers to the brothers Ephah and Avimi, sons of the sage Rahava of Pumbedita, who was a preeminent disciple of Rabbi Yehuda, the founder of the yeshiva in Pumbedita. Rabbi Yehuda himself was the second generation Babylonian Amora. Ephah and Avimi are cited several times throughout the Gemara as raising difficulties with regard to the opinions of other Amoraim, as well as questioning each other's statements. The Gemara relates that Ephah studied tractate Shirut on the Rabbah, and Avimi tested his knowledge of the tractate. Ephah and Avimi are also cited in Jewish Talmud, where their opinions are cited by the sages of Eretz Yisrael, although their Ephah is referred to as Heifa. Burning renders burning pigul, e.g. the burning the handful of the intent to burn the frankincense the next day renders the meal offering pigul. And this is the halacha even according to the rabbis, who say that one who does render an offering pigul with the intent occurring during the sacrifice of the half-permitting factor. So just the note about that. Afila the Rabbanon the Amri Ein mafaltin b'chatzi mater chodu. Rabbi Meir also maintained that the offering is pigul, as he holds that one renders an offering pigul with improper intent during the sacrifice of half a permitting factor. According to Rabbi Yossi, who holds that one permitting factor cannot render another permitting factor pigul. 13b, the offering is not rendered pigul with such intent. There is an opinion that even Rabbi Yossi concedes that the offering renders pigul in this case, as a handful and frankincense were fixed in one vessel, and the pigul action as well as the pigul intent both refer to the rite of burning. Therefore, the intent of pigul extends over the entire meal offering, and that is from the Shita Mechbeses on 13b, citing the Tosfos his Zoniot. E.g., when sacrificing a handful alone with the intent of pigul. The reason is that this statement applies only where he had intent during the sacrifice of the handful to consume the remaining the next day, and the frankincense stands intact, as he had no intent with regard to it. But here, when he had intent with regard to frankincense while burning the handful, it is considered as though he had intent with regard to the entire permitting factor. Rabbi said, we learned this halacha in the Mishnah as well in 12a. This is the principle in a case of anyone who removes the handful, or places the handful in the vessel, or conveys the vessel with the handful to the altar, or burns the handful on the altar with the intent to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, or to burn an item whose typical manner is such that one burns it on the altar outside its designated area. The meal offering is unfit, but there is no liability for carrying. If his intent was to do so beyond this designated time, the offering is pigul, and one is liable to receive karet on account of it. Rather explained, what is it not correct to say that the halacha with regard to burning is similar to these, i.e. the removal of the handful, its placement in the vessel, and the conveying? Accordingly, just as with regard to these, whether one's intent was to partake of the remainder the next day or to burn the frankincense the next day, the halacha is that the offering is pigul. So too with regard to burning, whether one's intent was to partake of the remainder or to burn the frankincense the next day, the offering is pigul. Of nami tenena of haktara bein le'echol bein haktir. The Mishnah cannot be referring to a case where one burns a handful with the intent to burn the handful itself the next day, as he's in fact burning it now. Rather, the Mishnah must be referring to a priest who intends to burn the frankincense the next day. The Rabbeinu Gershom Mo Hagola. The Gemara rejects this comparison. No, with regard to these, whether one's intent was to partake of the remainder or to burn the frankincense the next day, the offering is in fact pigul. In regard to burning, if one's intent was to partake of the remainder the next day, yes, it's pigul. But if one's intent was to burn the frankincense the next day, it's not pigul. The Gemara relates Rav Menachot Bar Gada sat before Abaye, and while he was sitting, said the name of Rav Hista, burning does not render burning pigul. If one intent during the burning of the handful to burn the frankincense the next day, the meal offering is not pigul, as burning does not render burning pigul. That's from the Rambam Sefer Vod, Hilchot Petulei Magdashin 16:8. E.g., burning the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense the next day does not render the offering pigul. And this is the halacha even according to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says in the Mishnah that one renders an offering pigul through intent during the sacrifice of half of a binting factor, e.g., when sacrificing the handful but not the frankincense with intent to pigul. Rabbi Menachot Bar Gada explains that the reason is that this statement of Rabbi Meir applies only where he had intent during the sacrifice of the handful to consume the remaining the next day, as a handful is their permitting factor. But here, as a handful is not a permitting factor of the frankincense, something cannot be rendered pigul through it. Abai said to Rav Menachot, "Answer me, my master, did Rav Hista state this halach in the name of Rav?" Rav Menachot said to Abai, "Yes." One notes that it was also stated explicitly. Rav Hista says that Rav says burning does not render burning pigul. Rav Yaakov Ba'idi said in the name of Abaye, we learn in the Mishnah as well that halacha is according to the opinion of Rav. If one slaughters one of the lambs with the intent to partake of it the next day, that lamb is pigul and the other lamb is fit. If we slaughter one lamb with the intent to partake of the other the next day, both lambs are fit. What is the reason? Is it not due to the fact that since the first lamb is not a permitting factor of the second lamb, it cannot render the second lamb pigul? The same reason should apply in the case of a handful and frankincense. The one objects to suggestion. No, there is a difference between these cases. It is only there in the Mishnah that one lamb cannot render the other pigul, and is not fixed in one vessel with the other lamb, and therefore each animal stands independent of the other. But here, as the handful and frankincense were fixed in one vessel for the purpose of offering them, they consider like one item, and one of them therefore renders the other pigul. Rabbi Hamnuna said, Rabbi Hanina helped me internalize this following matter, and to me is equivalent to all the rest of my learning, as it contains a significant novelty. If one burn a handful with the intent to burn the frankincense the next day, and burn the frankincense the next day with to partake of the remainder the next day, the meal offering is pigul, as seen in the footnotes. According to the version of the Gemara, which is apparently the same text used by the Rambam, the Gemara's question is as follows: why do I need to teach a case where one burned the frankincense with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, when he could have referred to a case where one burned the handful with the intent both to burn the frankincense and partake of the remainder the next day? Rashi omits the term and the frankincense, which means when the case involves one who burned handful with the intent to burn the frankincense and partake of the remainder. According to Rashi, the Gemara's question is as follows: if Rabbi Hanina intends to teach that this offering is pigul, why does he say the case where there are two viable reasons for rendering the offering pigul? Why do I need to teach a case where only one of the reasons applies, i.e., either he burned the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense the next day, or he did so with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day? This would indicate that either reason is sufficient to render the offering pigul. If one burned the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense the next day, and subsequently burned the frankincense with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, the offering is pigul. Since the pigul intent has extended over the entire meal offering, the Rambam rules, and according to the version of the Gemara, according to Rashi's version, even if one had intent during the burning of the handful to burn the frankincense and partake of the remainder the next day, the offering is pigul, and that's the Rambam Sefer Vod, Hilchot Petulei Magdashin 16:8. See the Kutei Halacha. The Gemara asks, what is Rabbi Hanina teaching us? If he is teaching us that burning renders burning pigul, let him simply say, if one burned the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense, the offering is pigul. If he is teaching us that one renders an offering pigul through intent during the sacrifice of half of a pinning factor, then let him say, if one burned the handful with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, the offering is pigul. If he is coming to teach us both of these halachot, let him say, if one burned the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense or partake of the remainder the next day, the offering is pigul. Rav Ada Ba'ahava said, actually, Rabbi Hanina holds that burning does not render burning pigul, and therefore if one burned only the handful with the intent to burn the frankincense next day, the offering is not pigul. And he also holds that one does not render an offering pigul through intent during the sacrifice of half of a permitting factor, and consequently if one burned the handful with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, the offering is not pigul either. But it is different here, as intent of pickle has extended. So what's the footnote there? The fashta le machashava. According to Rashi's version of the Gemara, in which the case involves one who burned a handful with the intent to burn the frankincense and partake of the remainder the next day. Burning is not render burning pickle because intent is lacking with the remainder regard to the remainder. Similarly, this is considered half of a permitting factor, which cannot render the offering pickle, as intent is lacking during the sacrifice of the remaining permitting factor, i.e. the frankincense. Nevertheless, the combination of these intentions was referred to the remainder and the frankincense is sufficient to render the offering pickle. According to the Rambam's version of the Gemara, such intent is insufficient as it occurs during the sacrifice of only half of the permitting factor. He maintained that an offering is rendered pickle only when one has pickle intent during the sacrifice of all the permitting factors, regardless of the combination of intentions of the entire meal offering, as he has intent of a pickle during the burning of the handful with regard to the frankincense and during the burning of the frankincense with regard to the remainder. The Gemara relates that a Tana taught a bride before Rav Yitzchak bar Abba, if one burned the handful with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, if one burned only the frankincense or only the handful with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, the meal offering is disqualified. According to the opinion of the rabbis in the Mishnah, not Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Sefer Vod Hilchot B'Sulim Makdoshin 16:8. Everyone agrees that the meal offering is pickle. The Gemara raised a difficulty, but don't Rabbi Meir and the rabbis disagree in the Mishnah with regard to this very case. Rather, say that the Brisa states, everyone agrees that the offering is disqualified, as although the rabbis hold that such intent does not render an offering pickle, they concede that it disqualifies the offering. The Gemara challenges, but if one must amend the Brisa, let him say that the Brisa states it is pickle, and that is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara responds, it is reasonable that the Tana taught that everyone agrees, and that he accidentally exchanged the word pickle for disqualified, but he would not confuse the phrase. Most Braitot were not committed to writing, but rather were memorized by the Tanaim. It is therefore understandable that some Tanaim might err in the recitation of a Braita. It is generally assumed that such mistakes were limited and did not constitute dramatic deviations from the authentic language of the Braita. Consequently, while it is probable that the Tana would confuse disqualified with pickle, it is unlikely that he might interchange. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir with the term everyone agrees. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir with the phrase everyone agrees. So a summary from Perek 2, Chapter 2. The second chapter of Menachot deals primarily with the relationship between the various parts of a meal offering, certainly with regard to the halacha of pickle and the disqualification of a meal offering. One conclusion is that if a priest burned the handful of a meal offering with the intent to burn the frankincense the next day, the meal offering is rendered pickle. Although everyone accepts the principle that improper intent with one permitting factor does not render another permitting factor pickle, this principle applies only when each permitting factor remains independent, e.g. in the case of a communal peace offering of 2 lambs that accompanies the 2 loaves on Shavuot. By contrast, in a case such as that of a handful and frankincense of a meal offering, since the handful and frankincense are fixed to one vessel, they consider a single permitting factor with regard to rendering one another pickle. Similarly, each of the bowls of frankincense that accompany the shewbread renders the other pickle, as both bowls are fixed in a single vessel, i.e. on the table of the shewbread. Additionally, the Gemara concludes that if one sacrifices the handful of a meal offering with the intent to partake of the remainder the next day, but has no such intent during the sacrifice of the frankincense or vice versa, the offering is not rendered pickle in accordance with the principle that pickle is effected only when it has improper intent during the sacrifice of all the permitting factors of an offering. Similarly, a shewbread is rendered pickle only if one burns both bowls with intent of pickle. If all the permitting factors of an offering are sacrificed with intent of pickle, then even if one's intent referred to only part of the offering, e.g. one arrangement of shewbread, the entire offering is pickle. In light of the discussion concerning the intent of pickle while sacrificing an element of an offering, some halachot involving the ritual impurity of part of an offering are discussed in the chapter as well. The Gemara concludes that if one part of an offering becomes impure, e.g. one arrangement of the shewbread or one of the loaves from the meal offering of brought Shavuot, the remaining part is not rendered impure on account of it, and it must be consumed in a state of ritual purity. The Gemara's conclusion that the stage of pickle extends from one part of an offering to another is relevant only to offerings whose parts are of equal importance, e.g. the two arrangements of shubed. This is not a halacha when the offering comprises a principal element and a secondary one, e.g. a thanks offering and its accompanying loaves. Instead, the Gemara concludes that pickle intent with regard to the principal element renders a secondary element pickle as well, and not vice versa. Accordingly, a pickle intent with regard to the two lambs and accompanying the loaves of Shavuot renders both the lambs and the loaves pickle, whereas improper intent with regard to the loaves renders the loaves pickle but not the lambs. This is because the loaves are sanctified on account of the slaughter of the lambs, and since loaves are the secondary element, they do not render the lambs pickle. These halachot are applicable only to offerings whose parts are sanctified and sacrificed together. With regard to the libation accompanying an animal offering, they do not render the animal pickle, as they are secondary to the animal. They are not rendered pickle on account of the animal, since they may be brought even several days after the sacrifice of the animal. Introduction to Perek 3. And when one brings a meal offering unto the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour, and he shall pour oil upon it, and put frankincense upon it, and he shall bring it to Aaron's sons, the priest, and he shall remove the handful of its fine flour and of its oil, together with its frankincense, and the priest shall make its memorial part smoke upon the altar, an offering made by fire, of a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But that which is left of the meal offering shall be Aaron's and his sons. It is the most holy of the offerings of the Lord made by fire, and when you bring a meal offering baked in the oven, it shall be unleavened cakes of fine flour mingled with oil, or unleavened wafers spread with oil. And if your offering is a meal offering baked on a griddle, it shall be a fine flour leavened mingled with oil. You shall break it into pieces and pour oil on it. It is a meal offering. That's Leviticus 2:1-6. And every meal offering of yours you shall season with salt. Neither shall you suffer the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meal offering. You shall sacrifice salt with oil offerings. And that's Leviticus 2:13. And this is the law of the meal offering. The sons of Aaron shall sacrifice before the Lord in front of the altar. Leviticus 6:7. And you shall make a candelabrum of pure gold, of beaten work will the candelabrum be made. Even its base and its shaft and its goblets, its knobs and its flowers shall be of one piece with it. And there shall be 6 branches going out of its sides, 3 branches of candelabrum out on one side, and 3 branches of candelabrum out on its other side. 3 goblets made by almond blossoms in one branch, and a knob and a flower, and 3 goblets made of almond blossoms in the other branch, a knob and a flower. Therefore, for the 6 branches going out of the candelabrum. And in the candelabrum 4 goblets made like almond blossoms, its knobs and its flowers, and a knob under 2 branches of one piece with it, and a knob under 2 branches of one piece with it, and a knob under 2 branches of one piece with it, for the 6 branches going out of the candelabrum. Their knobs and their branches shall be of one piece with it, the whole of it one beaten work of pure gold. And you shall make its lamps 7, and they shall light its lamps to give light over against it, and its tongues and its pans shall be of pure gold. Of a talent of pure gold will be made of all of these vessels, and see that you shall make them after their pattern, which is being shown to you in the mount. And that's Leviticus 31-40. So he said again, Exodus 25:31-40. This chapter discusses 2 main topics. The first is the meal offering whose rites were performed improperly, or where various problems arose prior to their being burned on the altar. This chapter examines when these meal offerings are fit and when they are unfit. The chapter begins with the case of meal offerings that were sacrificed with the improper intent, and the situation where this intent does not disqualify the offering. Next, the chapter discusses the various rites of meal offering prescribed by the Torah and addresses which of these are indispensable to its sacrifice. Another topic is mixtures of meal offerings, a broad category that includes the case of 2 meal offerings that became intermingled, a meal offering that became intermingled with a handful moved from a meal offering, and a remainder of a meal offering that became intermingled with its handful or that of another meal offering. The chapter also explores the case of meal offering that contracted its impurity. It discusses the halacha of a handful that became impure, and the halacha of a meal offering whose remainder, which is designated to be eaten by a priest, became impure or was lost or burned. It is sufficient to burn the handful of this meal offering in order to fulfill one's obligation, or is there no halachic significance to the burning of the handful when there is nothing left of the meal offering from which it was taken? The chapter then examines the last part of the service of the meal offering, which is the burning of the handful. It discusses how this burning is performed, e.g. whether the handful must be placed in a vessel, and when exactly the remains permitted to be eaten by the priest. The details of these halachot, which address mainly the issue of when meal offerings whose rites were improperly performed are entirely fit, and when they are unfit, form the subject matter of the first section of the chapter. The second section of the chapter begins with the discussion of two parts of the meal offering, the handful and the remainder. Although they differ from one another, the absence of one prevents fulfillment of the mitzvah with the other, and the meal offering is fit only if both parts are intact. From here, the chapter provides a lengthy list of mitzvot that have various elements or different aspects of their performance, each of which are indispensable to their fulfillment. This list includes the candelabrum in the temple and its parts, which are subject to detailed examination in this chapter, and the passages from the Torah written in the mezuzah and on the parchment of phylacteries. In all of these cases, the Gemara analyzes the sources in these verses and discusses the details of the performance of these mitzvot. The Mishnah: Hakomis es hamincha lechol davar she'ein darko lechol lahakte davar she'ein darko lahakte kasher Rabbi Eliezer posel. In the case of one who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to consume it on the following day, an item that is not typically consumed, or to burn it on the following day, an item that is not typically burned on the altar, the meal offering is fit in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. That's from the Rabbin Sefer Voda Hilcha Pesulei Mokdoshin 14:8. From the meal offering with the intent to consume beyond its designated time, and items whose typical manner what's a kamitza? What's a handful? Most meal offerings require that a handful be taken by a priest and burned on the altar. Unless the service parallels the service of slaughtering performed on an animal sacrifice, which does not require a priest, the removal of the handful could be performed only by a priest. According to many authorities, a priest would scoop the flour out with the 3 middle fingers of his right hand, using his thumb and little finger to remove any surplus flour. He would then place the flour in the sacred vessel used in the temple service to consecrate it. Since the priest had to scoop out a precise handful of flour, no more, no less, scooping a handful was one of the more difficult services performed in the temple, see 11a. And such that one does not consume it, either handful or to burn beyond its designated time, an item whose typical manner is such that one does not burn it on the altar. Either remain in the meal offering, the meal offering is fit. But we also deems it unfit, although it's not pigul, and consuming it is therefore not punishable by excision in the world to come. Kare. In the case of one who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to consume beyond its designated time, an item whose typical manner is such that one does not consume it or burn beyond its designated time, an item whose typical manner is such that one does burn it on the altar, but his intent was to consume or burn it improperly less than an olive bulk. Pachos Makazayis, if one's intent while performing the sacrificial rites of an offering is to burn on the following day less than an olive bulk of an item that is typically burned on the altar, consume less than an olive bulk of an item that is typically consumed, the offering is fit. That's in the Rabbin Sefer Voda Hilcha Pesulei Mokdoshin 14:10. If the intent was to consume half an olive bulk and to burn half an olive bulk, what does that mean? If one's concerned while performing the sacrificial rites of an offering is to consume less than an olive bulk and to burn less than an olive bulk beyond the owner's offering's designated time or outside the designated area, the offering is fit, as consumption and burning do not join together. As from Rabbin Sefer Voda Hilcha Pesulei Mokdoshin 14:10, beyond the designated time, the meal offering is nevertheless fit because eating and burning do not join together. Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Yochanan says, what is the reason for the ruling of Rabbi Eliezer that the intention to consume beyond this designated time an item that is not usually consumed whether the meal offering fit? The verse states with regard to consuming an offering after its designated time, and if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of its peace offerings is at all consumed, ha'echol ye'akel, Leviticus 7:18, repeating for emphasis the term for consumption. He derived from the repeated term that the verse is speaking of two types of consumption. One is a consumption of the offering by a person, e.g. by the priest or the owner of the offering, and the other is a consumption of the sacrificial portions by their being burned on the altar. It serves to tell you that just as one's improper intent with regard to the consumption of a person renders the offering unfit, so too one's improper intent with regard to the consumption of the altar renders the offering unfit. And furthermore, this serves to tell you that just as one's improper intention that a portion of the offering designated for consumption by a person will be consumed on the following day by a person renders the offering unfit, and one's improper intention that a portion of the offering made for consumption of the altar will be consumed on the following day by the altar renders the offering unfit, so too one's improper intent that a portion of the offering designated for consumption by a person will be consumed on the altar renders the offering unfit, and one's improper intention that a portion of the offering designated for consumption of the altar will be consumed on the following day by a person renders the offering unfit. What is the reason for this derivation? It is derived from the fact that the merciful one expresses the burning of the offering using the language of consumption. And the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Elazar maintain the following: this fact that the merciful one expresses the burning of the offering using language of consumption. And that's the end of the Omid. I wish you a very good day, Shabbat Shalom, and peace and shalom. All the best. Bye.